Hey guys, today I'm going to go over the sandbox settings that I use to customize Project Zomboid. Technically this is geared towards build 42, but there is crossover with build 41. I typically use these settings to make the game more challenging, but also to balance runs more to my liking, making some things easier while making other things harder. So if you're interested in some settings explanations and maybe some challenge ideas, stick around. But I'm not going to cover everything because there is like a million settings and honestly I don't use all of them, and not all of them are super impactful anyways. That said, I will try to be somewhat thorough. So let's get into them. To start at the very beginning, how to get into the sandbox settings, because I imagine some people probably want this to be explained. So from the main screen, click Solo, then upper left hand corner, choose Customize Sandbox, choose your spawn area, and after that, you're there. Now the first category is time, but we're not going to touch anything here. If you want to make things easier and more chill though, you can change day length to 2 hours, but for balanced challenge, you should really leave it at 1 hour. Now moving on to the more important Zombies tab, here we're looking at my 16x preset. I use the Advanced tab, but to keep things simple, you can always just choose presets like low, high, insane, etc. And I never mess with distribution, but you can always try uniform if you'd like, but generally I would recommend just leaving it as it is. Now the respawn settings are a little more involved, so let's talk about it. I typically leave these on default until peak day, and then I use the mod sandbox settings to heavily reduce respawn after that. The sandbox settings mod allows you to change settings in the middle of a save, and I highly recommend incorporating that into your mod list. And by turning off respawn after peak day, you can avoid gimping the Z population, but also make it so that you can permanently clear areas. Now I'm not actually too sure that you need to do this in build 42, but it was something you needed to do in build 41. Anyway, if you turn down respawn settings from the start, at least in build 41 it worked this way, the areas you would visit prior to peak day wouldn't necessarily get up to the max population that they were supposed to. So you would actually end up making the game easier by accident, even if you had turned the population up. Anyway, these settings are kind of self-explanatory but still confusing. Respawn hours is how much time must pass before zombies start respawning in a cell. By default, it's 3 in-game days, which is actually kind of fast. When I change the settings later, I might set this to something like 720 or 7200 if you really want to keep those respawns down. The respawn unseen hours is how long you have to be away from a cell before the respawn hours timer can begin. This is one you'll definitely want to change if you really want to turn respawns off. Respawn multiplier is the percent of a cell's max population that can respawn when the other criteria have been met. So if a cell had a peak population of say 1000 and at a 10% respawn multiplier, that means 100 Zeds would respawn there every 72 hours if you haven't been to that cell in the last 16 in-game hours. And for reference, a cell is a 300 by 300 tile square. And for further reference, the main drag of Muldrow is about 4 cells long, though technically it extends into 6 cells north and south, and the total area of Muldrow, not including the McCoy logging compound, covers 10 cells. But enough nerd deep diving, let's talk about zombie speed. Personally, I don't like the standard build 42 Zeds and their behaviors. Like slow shamblers are just too slow, so I set everything to fast. Now I've tried the random sprinter setting in the sandbox, but I've never seen it work yet. so I usually add random sprinters by using the Random Zombies mod. These other settings here are also fairly self-explanatory, but I like to get rid of the other random traits because they tend to just be kind of annoying. I also usually set transmission to saliva only, because with as janky and hairpin as this game is, you don't need more ways to get unlucky. Getting scratched is supposed to be a 7% chance to give you the Nox virus, but every time I've been scratched in build 42, it's been 100%. Again, you can modify these other settings, but I don't find them to make a big difference either way, and for the most part, they are self-explanatory. So let's talk about rally groups. Rally groups are the little hordes that form, and you can customize them to a degree and alter their behavior. I generally like to increase the rally group size so that bigger hordes form. And new to the build 42 settings is the rally group variance option. With the settings I have here, rally groups from the sizes of 1 to 160 Zeds can form. Then there is the distance, separation, and radius settings, which cover how far Zeds will travel to join groups, how far groups will stay away from each other, and how close Zeds will gather to their designated rally group leader, measured in tiles. Anyway, you can mess with these settings and make things pretty different from the standard game. Like if you went uniform distribution and chose a rally group size of 0, which means no rally groups, there would be just a bunch of Zeds all standing alone, sorta evenly spread out, which is kind of weird, but offers a different sort of experience. Anyways, without mods, the hordes still leave some things to be desired, so I typically alter them farther with mods like Wandering Zombies and The Calm Before the Storm. And now a couple more things. If you don't want to significantly increase the population, I do recommend increasing the starting population. I think you need more Zeds off of start so that things just aren't too easy. But in brief, the Zed population numbers work like this. Every in-game day that passes, a cell's population will be increased based on these settings until you reach peak day, where the population multiplier and the peak multiplier will finally max out. So increase or decrease these to your heart's desire, and if you don't want to think about it too much, just use the presets. And now let's talk loot. You can actually turn on loot respawn if you'd like, and these settings work like the zombie respawn numbers. They're turned off by default and I never turn them on. This is really more of a multiplayer option, but you can turn them on for single player if you'd like. Now with build 42, there is a new looted building chance multiplier, which acts like a sort of meta event that adds to the immersion of the game by simulating the possibility of buildings being looted by other survivors. I kinda don't like this effect for my own run, so I turn it down to low. But having said that, let's get into the real loot settings. By default, things are on rare, and on these settings I think it's pretty easy to survive, but then again, I'm kind of a Project Zomboid veteran. Extremely rare makes things a little more difficult, particularly on the food and literature front, but I haven't really had trouble finding tools on this setting. Insanely rare, on the other hand, seems to almost remove things from the game. Like on my own insanely rare run after looting all of Muldrow, I don't think I found more than 20 things of canned food, which was a major hardship for me. So again, customize these things to your liking, but I will say that if you're interested in using guns, you might want to increase the ranged weapons or at least the ammunition to the normal setting. Either way, guns aren't overpowered in build 42 and they take a few levels of aim skill before they actually become efficient killing machines. So increasing guns and ammo won't trivialize the game's difficulty from the start. There is another new loot setting called the Zombie Population Loot Effect. This is supposed to make it so that if there is a lot of Zeds around, loot is increased. And I haven't really noticed this to do too much, though other people have said it does. And others have also said that you can use this basically to increase the Zed population. Anyway, I don't have too much experience with it, so I kind of don't have too much to say about it right now. Now, speaking of world settings, with Build 42, the first thing I like to do is extend the water and electricity shutoff times, simply because the new lighting system is aesthetically pleasing. Of course, this will make things easier and give you more time to find a generator and learn how to use it. In this tab, you can also turn off those pesky house alarms or increase or decrease the amount of gas at gas stations. Gas was pretty much infinite on standard build 41, though I think they've reduced it for build 42. But if you don't like that, you can always use the infinite gas pumps option. For now, I just leave these settings on default, but one setting that I definitely change is the light bulb lifespan, because I don't like playing a light bulb changing simulator. But other than that, I don't mess with the world settings, and I don't think there's anything else too important in here. So let's move on to nature. I don't change these too much either, but with build 42, there is a few issues with the farming system. So let's talk about how you might fix them. People have generally recommended changing the farming speed from 1 to 5, and to turn off the plant growing seasons. Otherwise, it might take quite a while for you to reap what you sow, like almost a full in-game year. Also of note in this tab is that you can change how dark it gets at night, and you can also increase the chance of looting clay by lakes and rivers for all those aspiring blacksmiths and masons out there. You can also increase the abundance of fish and crops if you'd like, but honestly, I never mess with these options. And now let's talk meta. You can turn off or increase the number of helicopter events. Until the expanded helicopter events mod comes out, I've increased this setting to sometimes, and that seems to happen about once every 10 days. I also turn up meta events. I like to use these to make the Zeds move around, just to make the world more dynamic and interesting. Otherwise, the Zeds pretty much just stand there and wait for you to walk into view, which is a little dull. Now, time before corpse removal is an important option to consider. I started increasing it so that I can enjoy the spectacle of the many dead Zeds laying around for longer. But you might want to keep it low for performance reasons. And then there is decaying corpse health impact. I've reduced this to low, but at low it seems as if you'll never get corpse sick no matter how many bodies are around, so I'm probably going to turn this back up. But if you don't like corpse sickness, you might try the low option. Another important performance option is blood level. For aesthetic purposes, I like to use Ultra Gore with the improved blood effects mod, which is visually satisfying. But to increase performance, you might try turning blood level down or all the way off. And you might also turn off corpse maggot spawn for the same reason. Now let's talk the all-important character settings. Build 42 is generally a slower game. It requires you to rest often and to proceed more slowly. Now I find this aspect of Build 42 on its default mode a little overbearing, so I change endurance regeneration to fast or very fast, and stats decrease to slow or very slow. And then even with a max strength, max fitness character who gets up to like 6 or 7 weapon skill, I still tend to get fatigued quite quickly and need to rest very often. And I haven't done this yet myself, but the nutrition system has been so broken in Build 42 so far that you might consider just turning it off, so you don't have to deal with getting underweight. That or become a dairy farmer. And if you happen to be a newer player that finds the game difficult, try the starter kit to help you get going. But now let's talk free trait points. I used to give myself at least 1 free trait point for Speed Demon, but currently things aren't balanced to my liking in Build 42, so I give myself 10. Really, this is a preference thing, but there's no reason you should limit yourself to the default points trait system if you don't want to. You can just customize it here. I've also started using a player built construction strength of high because Zeds break your walls and barricades too quickly for my liking. And now we come to the infamous muscle strain factor. Muscle strain factor! As I said, I play max strength, max fitness characters, so this doesn't affect me too much, but then again, I use a shotgun for a couple of hours and suddenly I've got maximum muscle strain and I'm unable to kill Zeds even with melee. I don't mind that actually because it kind of makes things interesting, but if you want to turn muscle strain off or increase it, here it is. Now the discomfort moodle I actually find pretty annoying, so I reduced this by half. And then despite that, the moodle is still pretty much permanently there anyways, even if I don't wear a bunch of armor. But that's okay because I'd probably be pretty uncomfortable being covered in blood and guts all the time and never taking a shower. You know, if we're being real here. I mean, I get uncomfortable if I don't cut my hair like every 2 weeks. Thank you, Navy. Now, rear vulnerability is an interesting option. I think it should be high, but if you want to give up your rear free of consequences, you might as well change this option to low consequences for giving up your rear. To each his own. Next up is weapon multi-hit. Don't use this. It's too game breaking. Yeah, people will call you a noob, but the real problem with it is that there is no great way to balance it. On the other hand, if you want to trivialize the difficulty of Project Zomboid and probably lose interest in the game fast, go ahead and turn this on. Next thing you'll want to notice is that the firearm jam multiplier is now 0 by default. No jamming, because guns already suck enough as it is. In that spirit, I also turn off firearm weather multiplier and firearm headgear effect, because again, firearms already suck enough as it is. But if that isn't enough sucking for you, you could always increase these. In a similar way that multi-hit breaks the game, you can also turn off melee movement disruption. No one really talks about this one except for big nerds like me, so people won't make fun of you as much for using it, but yeah, it kind of breaks the game too. Now if you prefer to spawn in with drip as opposed to finding drip, you can turn on the all clothing unlocked option to use in your character creation screen. Also, you can now reread books. Modify how often with the literature cooldown option. Disassembling items for experience is once again a thing, but it's off by default. Turn it on if you have disassembly nostalgia. And by now you can only gain experience from watching TV and VHS tapes until level 3 in each skill. Increase this to 10 if you want to increase the VHS relevance later into the game. But now let's talk experience multipliers. If you've played Build 42 at all, you've probably noticed that it's grindy. Build 42 stands love it, and Build 42 critics criticize it. Me, I'm somewhere in the middle, but I like challenging, brutal, somewhat grindy playthroughs, so I might actually secretly be a Build 42 stan. But my idea of balance is somewhat different than the Indie Stones. So I've started setting the global experience multiplier to 2x, and I recommend you do the same if you don't want to grind as much. Personally, I might reduce this some in the future to make things more masochistic, but to be honest with you, 2x isn't that much of a boon, and skill level ups really aren't that rewarding, so it kind of doesn't matter. And because there is a million skills and you don't want to go over them individually, I just recommend using the global multiplier. But you might want to make an exception for specific, very slow leveling skills like aiming and welding. Anyway, now let's talk vehicles. People really haven't caught on to this yet, but vehicles are the most powerful tool and weapon in Build 42. Unless the Indie Stone nerfs vehicles, vehicles will fast become the new meta in Project Zomboid. Now, vehicles were always a massive power spike, but for different reasons. With the new combat restrictions, they are also the best weapon. Anyway, the spawn rates, condition, and gas are pretty low by default, but you can change all of those options here. Personally, I only like to increase the gas vehicle consumption because it's too slow in my opinion. Anyway, let's finish up with Livestock. I still haven't interacted with Livestock enough to say how you might go about customizing these options. I've kept chickens and cows and collected eggs and milk, and honestly it seems fine as it is. So I don't know, I just leave them as they are. But if there are any Zomboid livestock experts out there, please feel free to drop some advice. And now let's sum things up in a nutshell. If you want to increase the challenge, increase pop and reduce loot. If you want to make it less grindy, increase your experience gain. And if you want to make things more chill, increase day length, and change the endurance regeneration and stats decrease rates. But if you found this video useful, please consider giving it a like. And if you have any sandbox wisdom of your own, don't hold out on us and drop it in the comments. Alright, I'm out. Peace.